My girlfriend lied about pregnancy while I supported her lifestyle and dreams, so I walked away calmly and took back my peace. Now she panics. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and when I first started dating my girlfriend, I genuinely believed that love meant stepping up in every way, emotionally, financially, and mentally. She had this huge vision of starting her own business, a boutique consulting thing she was obsessed with, and I couldn't help but admire that fire in her eyes. She also had a lifestyle that wasn't cheap: weekend trips, fancy dinners, even those impulsive designer purchases, and somehow, I convinced myself that helping her navigate all of it was part of being the good partner. I paid the rent on the apartment we shared, covered her bills when deadlines came up, and even helped her invest in her little side projects, believing that temporary sacrifices would pay off in the long term. She had a way of framing it all like it was a struggle she couldn't handle alone, saying things like, "I don't know what I'd do without you," and "You're literally keeping me afloat right now," which made me feel indispensable, like the backbone of her world. My friends and family noticed too. They'd tell me how impressive it was that I was so patient, generous, and supportive, painting her as the ambitious, independent girl and me as the stable rock. I remember thinking, day after day, late nights hunched over my laptop while she sketched plans or took calls for her business, that this was love, trust, loyalty, and sacrifice all intertwined, and that my support would be reciprocated with honesty and dedication. But even as I poured everything I had into her dreams, a small, nagging doubt sometimes flickered in the back of my mind: the way she dodged certain questions about expenses, or how her excitement sometimes seemed to mask frustration, but I brushed it off, telling myself I was just imagining things. That night, as I sat in our tiny living room surrounded by receipts and spreadsheets, listening to her pitch a new client over the phone with that confident laugh, I smiled to myself, feeling proud and secure. I had no idea how quickly the illusion of trust one had built was about to crumble, leaving me to question everything I thought I knew about love. Things started escalating faster than I expected. Her weekend trips turned into spontaneous getaways, brunches became lavish events, and even the little things, like specialty coffees or last-minute shopping sprees, began adding up. At first, I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just part of her ambitious lifestyle, and anyway, supporting her dreams was my responsibility if I loved her. I found myself working overtime, skipping dinners with friends, postponing personal plans, and draining more of my savings to make sure she never had to compromise on what she wanted. "I just don't know how you do all of this for me," she said one evening, wrapping herself around me on the couch, her voice soft but tinged with guilt, and I smiled, believing she truly appreciated everything I was giving. My friends kept complimenting me too, saying things like, "You're such a solid guy," seriously, reinforcing that I was doing the right thing and that my sacrifices defined me as someone dependable. The problem was, the more I gave, the more her expectations seemed to grow. Small hints of secretive spending started surfacing, charges I didn't recognize, texts she deleted quickly, her explanations vaguely detailed or overly rushed. And still, I rationalized it: maybe she's just stressed. Maybe she needs space to handle all this pressure, I told myself. I felt proud of my role, imagining myself as the anchor in her whirlwind of ambition and chaos. Yet at night, when the apartment was quiet and I lay awake scrolling through bank statements, a sinking feeling crept in, one I tried desperately to ignore. I kept replaying moments, questioning why she seemed tense when I brought up finances or why her excitement about plans sometimes seemed forced. Then one evening, after another late dinner, she insisted we try, for inspiration. She paused mid-conversation, looking at me with a soft, almost vulnerable expression. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she whispered, leaning close, and I felt that warm, familiar surge of purpose. I wanted to believe it fully, more than anything. But in the back of my mind, that nagging doubt whispered, something wasn't right, and I had no idea how far down this spiral I was heading. I started noticing small inconsistencies in her stories that I couldn't ignore anymore. She'd mention doctor appointments or meetings I didn't know about, and when I asked for details, she'd wave it off with, "It's nothing, just work stuff, don't worry." At first, I brushed it off, convincing myself I was overreacting. After all, who likes being questioned about their day when they're stressed? But then there were the texts she deleted immediately, the late-night calls she said were just colleagues, and the tiny contradictions in her weekend plans that didn't add up. I remember sitting on the couch one night, staring at my phone, scrolling through messages, trying to rationalize every little thing. Maybe she's just stressed with her business, I told myself, over and over, like a mantra, because the thought that she might be hiding something felt unbearable. Friends had started dropping subtle hints too, casually asking, "You sure everything's okay between you two? She seemed different the other day." I dismissed it every time, laughing nervously, insisting I knew her better than anyone else. I continued throwing myself into supporting her projects, financing her ambitions, and rearranging my life to accommodate hers. At work, I felt stretched thin but justified it. Late nights and skipped meals were a small price to pay for someone I loved. "You're literally my everything," she'd say, her hand brushing mine in that familiar, intimate way, and I would believe it fully, letting the doubt slip further into the background. But every time she dodged a question or got defensive over trivial things, the unease grew like a low hum I couldn't turn off. The worst part was how she made me feel guilty for noticing. "Why are you questioning me again? Don't you trust me?" she'd say, her voice trembling just enough to make me pause, and I'd immediately apologize, thinking I'd misjudged her. Still, that feeling of something being off lingered, heavy in my chest, pressing down during quiet moments when I was alone. And as I lay awake one night listening to the hum of the city outside, I realized that my trust, which I had built so carefully, was starting to feel fragile, and I didn't yet know who was holding the hammer. I didn't realize how far I'd stretched myself until I checked my bank account one Sunday morning and felt my stomach drop. Rent, bills, her project investments, spontaneous purchases, everything I'd covered had slowly bled my savings dry. I remember running my fingers over the numbers, a pit forming in my chest, thinking, how did I let this happen? Yet I told myself it was fine, that love sometimes meant carrying more weight than anyone else, that supporting her dreams was my role. She noticed my exhaustion and framed it as pride in me, saying things like, "You work so hard for us, I don't know what I'd do without you," and I believed her completely. Every sacrifice felt justified, every missed night out or skipped hobby seemed like a small price for the future we were supposedly building together. But the cracks were starting to show. She began hinting at needing more money for her growth opportunities, casual mentions of upcoming trips or tools her business desperately needed, always paired with a look that made me feel guilty for questioning it. I wanted to feel secure in my decisions, so I ignored the subtle panic rising in my chest. Friends would occasionally comment, "Are you sure you're not giving too much?" and I'd laugh nervously, brushing it off. The apartment smelled faintly of her perfume, comforting yet suffocating, a reminder of how intertwined our lives had become. I could hear the city hum outside our window, a rhythm that contrasted sharply with the chaos and exhaustion inside me. And still, I convinced myself that what I was doing mattered, that my support was building something lasting, that loyalty and trust would be reciprocated. But deep down, I felt a persistent unease, a whisper telling me that I was giving everything for someone who might not even be truthful. That night, as I stared at her sleeping peacefully beside me, completely unaware of the storm of numbers and responsibilities I'd swallowed, I felt a mix of pride and dread, and I had no idea that things were about to get much worse. Then it happened. She told me she was pregnant. Just like that, over coffee one morning, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I'm pregnant." My heart stopped for a second, a mix of shock, fear, and pride. I remember fumbling for words, the cup of coffee trembling in my hands, thinking, we're really going to be parents? I felt a surge of responsibility wash over me, and without hesitation, I promised her I'd be there for every step, every appointment, every sleepless night. Immediately, I started rearranging my life. I shifted my work schedule, saved more aggressively, cut back even further on personal expenses, and began imagining a future that included a tiny human dependent on us. She smiled at me in a way that made my chest ache, her hand brushing against mine, the familiar warmth, her eyes glistening with tears she claimed were from joy. "You're going to be the best dad," she whispered, and I believed her, feeling a pride I'd never known before. Friends and family shared the excitement, messaging me, calling me, telling me how lucky I was, and I soaked it all in, happy to be seen as the rock of this new family. But beneath the joy, a strange tension started creeping in. Some appointments seemed vague, her explanations about symptoms were inconsistent, and she'd dodge simple questions about tests or timing. I brushed it off, telling myself it was stress or excitement. Pregnancy could do that to anyone, right? I wanted to believe in this new reality, and I clung to that belief as if it were oxygen. Still, late at night, sitting alone with the hum of the city outside our window, a quiet doubt whispered, something didn't feel right, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear the truth. As the weeks went by, the small cracks started to show, tiny but sharp enough to cut through the excitement I'd been feeling. Her appointments often didn't add up, times she claimed to be at the clinic didn't match what the office had actually scheduled, and some of her symptoms seemed off. She'd get defensive when I asked for details, saying, "I'm stressed, just let it go," and I'd immediately apologize, convincing myself I was overreacting. But the unease kept growing, gnawing at the edges of my mind every time she changed the topic or hit her phone a little too carefully. I remember sitting on our couch one evening, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows across the room, staring at her laughing on a Zoom call, and feeling this strange knot in my chest I couldn't shake. I still wanted to believe in her, in us, in the story she was painting, so I continued supporting her fully, paying for extra tests she insisted were routine, buying vitamins, preparing meals she claimed were essential for the baby's health. Friends started whispering questions when she wasn't around, their voices tinged with doubt. "Are you sure everything's normal?" one asked. I'd smile nervously, insisting I trusted her completely. But every time she got flustered over minor questions or texts I happened to see, the pit in my stomach deepened. The apartment, once a sanctuary, felt heavier at night, like the walls themselves were holding secrets from me. And then, one night, as rain tapped softly against the window, I overheard her on a phone call, her voice lighter, almost playful. I froze, listening, heart hammering, realizing she was saying things that didn't match the life she'd told me we were building. My chest tightened. Something was very wrong, and I knew, deep down, I was standing on the edge of a truth I wasn't prepared for, but I couldn't stop myself from wanting to know. By this point, everything felt like walking through a storm I couldn't escape. Her demands escalated in subtle but constant ways, more expensive doctor visits, specialty foods, maternity gear, and little indulgences she insisted were necessary for the baby. I worked longer hours, skipped social events, and postponed even basic personal plans, convincing myself it was all part of being a loving, responsible partner. The thing that hurt most was how effortlessly she framed me as the problem whenever I questioned anything. "Why are you being so paranoid? Don't you trust me?" she'd ask, her voice calm but with a sharp edge that made me second-guess myself instantly. I'd apologize, swallow my pride, and convince myself that my doubts were irrational, that her needs were simply bigger than my fears. At the same time, the emotional weight of it all was crushing me. The constant vigilance, the juggling of finances, the endless mental energy spent keeping up appearances, it was exhausting. I'd sit in bed at night, the city lights spilling through the blinds, feeling the tension in my shoulders, my chest heavy as if I were carrying the weight of both our lives. The apartment smelled faintly of her perfume, comforting yet suffocating, a reminder of the life I'd built around her lies. I'd glance at the little notebook where I tracked every expense, every appointment, every promise, and wonder if this was what love was supposed to feel like. And yet, despite the growing tension, I couldn't stop. I kept giving, kept trusting, kept hoping that this would all pay off, that we were building something real. But deep down, I felt like I was teetering on the edge, and one misstep could send everything crashing down. That night, as she curled up beside me, whispering about future plans and our little family, I felt a sharp, gnawing anxiety I couldn't ignore. Something was about to shatter, and I had no idea how deep the betrayal would go. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The unease had grown into a gnawing certainty, and I knew I had to confront the truth for my own sanity. One afternoon, I secretly scheduled a doctor's appointment for her, or so I thought, but went alone to verify everything. Sitting in the sterile, quiet office, the nurse looked at me with confusion when I asked about her records. That's when it hit me, she wasn't pregnant. None of the appointments, none of the tests, none of the symptoms were real. My chest tightened, my stomach dropped, and I felt a surge of disbelief and rage that made my hands shake. When I confronted her that evening, she tried to cry, to twist the story, to make me feel guilty for doubting her. I didn't mean to lie. I was scared. I don't know, she stammered, tears streaming, but her eyes betrayed calculation rather than remorse. I felt everything inside me shatter, the trust I'd built, the sacrifices I'd made, the sleepless nights and drained savings. Friends and family were shocked when I shared the truth, looking at her with the same disbelief I felt mirrored in their eyes. She had manipulated my love, my responsibility, my pride, turning it all into a lie she could control. I remember sitting on the couch after she left the room, the apartment eerily silent, the hum of the city outside cutting through my thoughts. I felt hollow, drained, and more alone than I had ever been in my life. Every dollar I had spent, every moment I had sacrificed, seemed meaningless. And yet, in that crushing moment, a small flicker of clarity appeared. I had been played, but I still had the power to reclaim my life. The realization was bitter, but it was mine, and I knew that moving forward meant making a choice I'd been avoiding for far too long. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog of betrayal and exhaustion. I kept replaying every conversation, every promise, every time I'd bent over backward for her, and it all felt like a trap I'd willingly walked into. My bank account was depleted, my time stolen, and my trust shattered. I'd sit alone in the apartment, staring at the quiet hum of the city outside, feeling like the walls were closing in on me, suffocating me with the weight of my own naivety. Friends reached out, trying to comfort me, but even their words felt hollow. I couldn't shake the shame of being manipulated, of being blind to what was in front of me for so long. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, heart racing, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever feel safe trusting anyone again. She tried contacting me constantly, messages piling up on my phone, pleading, apologizing, spinning stories, each one more desperate than the last. But I was numb, angry, disappointed, exhausted, and utterly drained. Every attempt she made to manipulate my emotions backfired, leaving me feeling empty and furious in equal measure. I remember the sting of realizing how easy it had been for someone to weaponize my love, my loyalty, and my trust against me. I wanted to scream, to break something, to shake her and demand answers, but I didn't have the energy. My rock-bottom low wasn't just about heartbreak or money, it was the erosion of my sense of self, the feeling that I'd lost control over my own life. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark of defiance flickered. A quiet thought that maybe, just maybe, walking away wasn't just an option, it was the only way to take back my peace. But in that moment, the anger and despair were suffocating, and the path forward felt impossible. The apartment felt colder than ever, and the hum of the city outside became a reminder of how alone I really was. After days of endless messages, pleas, and excuses, I realized something had to change. I decided to walk away, not angrily, not dramatically, but calmly, deliberately, reclaiming control over my life. I packed up the few belongings that were mine, returned what belonged to her, and set clear boundaries. No yelling, no arguments, no more attempts to manipulate me emotionally, just a firm, unwavering decision to prioritize my peace. Friends and family supported me, praising the dignity in my exit, but the real satisfaction came from within. I finally felt like I was steering my own life again. I remember leaving the apartment one morning, the city streets cool and quiet, a faint drizzle hitting my jacket, and feeling a strange mix of relief and lingering hurt. She called, she texted, even showed up at a few places I frequented, panic in her eyes, but I stayed composed, never answering, never letting her see that I had been affected by her lies. I focused on small steps, paying off debts she hadn't known about, reclaiming my schedule, and rebuilding routines that had been buried under months of chaos. For the first time in a long while, I slept through the night without anxiety gnawing at me, the apartment feeling lighter, more like mine again. I began journaling, reflecting, and slowly piecing together the person I had been before the manipulation took over. Yet, even in walking away, a part of me was still on edge, waiting for the next attempt to pull me back in. The lingering tension was a reminder of the power she had once held and how close I had come to losing myself entirely. But with every calm step forward, that power slipped away, leaving me with a quiet but profound sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. And as I looked out at the city from my new apartment window, rain still falling softly, I realized that for the first time, I was truly untouchable, at least by her. In the weeks that followed, I focused entirely on rebuilding what she had almost destroyed. I started by untangling my finances, closing joint accounts, recovering what I could, and setting strict boundaries around spending that was only mine. I also began investing time in myself, sleeping properly, exercising, cooking meals I actually enjoyed, and rediscovering hobbies I had neglected for months while caught up in her drama. Therapy became a lifeline, helping me untangle the guilt, shame, and self-doubt she had sown in me. Friends became my anchor, their presence constant and grounding, reminding me that I wasn't alone, and that my feelings were valid. Each small victory, booking a solo trip, laughing without guilt, making decisions without her input, was a reminder that I could trust myself again. I felt the fog of manipulation slowly lift, replaced by clarity and focus I hadn't experienced in years. Even when she tried reaching out, her panic-laden messages and desperate calls no longer rattled me, they only reinforced how far I had come. I began to feel empowered, like I'd reclaimed not just my life, but my agency, my dignity, and my future. The apartment smelled different now, the soft hum of the city outside a comforting rhythm instead of a reminder of lies. And yet, despite the calm, I knew that the final confrontation, seeing the consequences of her actions unfold, was still ahead, quietly waiting to seal the chapter for good. Eventually, she realized that my calmness was unshakable, and that I wasn't coming back. Her messages turned frantic, calls desperate, and even mutual friends were roped into her panic, asking if I had seen reason. But I didn't respond. I had already reclaimed my life, my time, and my peace, and nothing she could say would undo that. I remember sitting in my apartment one evening, the city lights glowing through the window, feeling a quiet satisfaction as her frantic energy buzzed through my notifications without touching me. For the first time in months, I felt untouchable, free from the manipulation that had consumed me. I watched as her desperation grew, and for the first time, I saw the consequences of her lies unfold without having to lift a finger. Friends who had initially doubted my judgment now congratulated me on my restraint and composure, telling me how proud they were that I had walked away with dignity intact. I focused on my own growth, rebuilding savings, pursuing personal projects, and reconnecting with people who truly cared. Each day brought a small victory, a clear mind, a lighter heart, and the confidence that I could trust myself again. I realized that the ultimate power wasn't in confrontation or revenge, it was in taking back my peace and letting her panic in the aftermath of her own choices. And as I leaned back, the hum of the city soft around me, I finally understood that I had not just survived the betrayal, I had thrived. She had tried to take everything from me, my trust, my money, my heart. But in walking away calmly, I had taken back far more, my dignity, my freedom, and a life that belonged entirely to me. And that realization, that quiet, unshakable strength, was the sweetest victory of all.